If you're hungry and it comes time to choose what takeout food to order for dinner, your final decision might take a series of choices to reach. Are you in the mood for hot or cold food? Do you want it to be spicy or sweet? Ethnic or domestic? All of these choices make their way towards a final named item, and in my example, spaghetti. While you may have gone through this decision process hundreds of times, I'm guessing you've probably rarely thought of it in the reverse. For instance, when was the last time you looked at a plate of food and considered it as a list of descriptors? Hot, savory, Italian, instead of just calling it spaghetti? Probably not recently. When it comes to materials, I find it extremely useful to think of them in this way, not by their proper name, but instead as a list of descriptors. So let's look at a few examples and then talk about how to break them down into their material properties. Here I've got car paint, brick, a rubber playground ball, and watermelon. So the first question I'm going to ask myself is, what is their local color? And when I say local, I just mean red. But they all look a little bit different. And that's because the local color's dominance of an object is really dependent on how glossy it is. And the glossier it is, the less visible that local color, or the natural color, will be. Sometimes it can be really tricky for highly reflective objects like chrome or silver, because they don't really have much local color to speak of. It's primarily reflected environment. For instance, if you take a look at this car paint on the left, you would call it a red car if you could see the entire thing, but this swatch right here has a lot of reflected color. In fact, it's so reflective that you can see the sky and other cars in the parking lot. So you might be hard-pressed, when zoomed in this close, to decide if this was red paint or if maybe it was purple instead. So a great starting point when determining material is the local color. Next up is surface texture. Here you're going to look for small-scale disruptions from the major surface direction. So it might be the rough, porous quality of the brick, or maybe the subtle patterning on the surface of the playground ball. These are very shallow indentations, but they make a really big difference in the way that light scatters across the form. They also add quite a bit of character. For instance, if a watermelon is shiny and red, but it didn't have that surface texture, it might quickly lose its material identification. You might get it confused with a rubber ball or even car paint. The surface texture says a lot about the character of a material. Another incredibly descriptive characteristic of materials is the reflectivity, or the glossiness. Does the object have a shiny highlight? Well, this means that it's got glossy reflectivity. Some objects like car paint are extremely reflective. They almost look like mirrors. But then the watermelon is also glossy, but its reflectivity is a bit more diffused. This means that each of those little protrusions has a tiny highlight, but you couldn't hold up a piece of watermelon and see your face in it like a mirror. If it doesn't have a shiny highlight at all, like the brick, this means that it's not glossy. At most viewing angles, it doesn't have any reflectivity at all. Objects without this glossy finish tend to diffuse light more evenly across their surface, and they might appear lower contrast than highly glossy objects, which tend to have quicker shifts between light and dark. Finally, some objects have what's called translucency. In this set here, the watermelon is really the only example, but skin, bat wings, frosted glass, and leaves are other examples of translucent objects. And what happens with these objects is that light enters through the upper layers of these materials, and then it bounces around inside because they're somewhat porous. So as a result, they can appear to sort of glow from within. If you want to try this for yourself, get a powerful flashlight, darken the room, and stick a thumb or your whole hand over top of it. See how your hand glows red? That's because your skin is somewhat translucent. If you were to cover the same flashlight with a ceramic dinner plate, it wouldn't transmit any light, and you'd have a completely opaque object. In these two examples, you can see translucent in the bat's wing and transparent in the jello, because you could actually see through jello. You could hold it up and see an object through it, but a bat's wing is really only going to let light through. So it's important to know the difference between these two because you'd be handling them differently in your illustration. When translucent objects like skin, or in this case even marble, are thicker than bats' wings, they don't tend to visually glow quite so much, but instead they make the shadows less severe. So if you take a look at these two statues, the one on the left with marble has a slight amount of this translucency, where the light goes into the marble and bounces around a little bit, and in doing so softens the shadows. But then this bronze statue on the right doesn't have any translucency at all, no subsurface scattering. So what you have are very dark shadows. So one trick to making skin look more lifelike is to remember to render the shadows less dark. And this is because of that subsurface scattering that brightens up those shadows. Considering materials as a collection of descriptors like this might seem a little unnatural at first, but it really is a secret to efficient painting. Your alternative is to learn how to paint all materials one at a time. Brick, rubber, car paint, watermelon, concrete, sheet steel, burnished brass, etc. It's an infinitely long list. But if instead you can learn general rules on painting these qualities, these material properties, like glossy versus matte finish, you can use that as a shortcut for painting a huge variety of materials. It's also essential for inventing your own materials. For instance, if you want to become a concept artist, you're going to be called upon to create and invent all sorts of materials on sci-fi and fantasy creatures. So if you can begin to see the similarities between different materials in sort of a categorical way, it's much easier to envision them on your own. So as you prepare for future drawings, look at your reference material with these simple questions in mind. Local color, surface texture, reflectivity, and translucency. These are by no means the only ways to describe materials, but it's a really great starting point. And these are some of the broadest categories that'll help you compartmentalize the way you think about materials. So in the later videos, I'm going to go through some practical steps on how to paint a variety of materials. Specifically, I'll be doing the matte finish, older, rusted material you see on the left, and then the very glossy, enameled surface that you see on the right. While I make these, I'm going to be using casual references to the same language that I defined in this video. So if you didn't quite get a hold of those names, like local color, for instance, I'm going to be using them over and over again. So it's worth watching this enough times just to get familiar with the definitions.